Great. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Food Power Festival. This is the session on holiday food provision. So that's food and activity provision. From pilots to national scale up is our theme, and that really recognises that right across the four nations, we're in a state where what were fairly localised and not very evenly spread holiday provision programmes, we're now moving to a situation where every local authority and council are expected to be providing provision during school holidays, and looking at what's happening, what does good practice look like, what's working, what's not working, and how are we preparing for that national level scale up. So we've got a really packed programme today with representations from right across the four nations of the UK, which is fantastic, and from people involved in provision at different levels, as well as the perspective of young people themselves. So just a couple of housekeeping notes. We'd appreciate if you would all keep yourselves muted while you're not speaking. What I would encourage you to do is to use the chat function, which you'll see at the bottom of your screens. Please use that right now to introduce yourselves in this webinar, so that you can check it's working and check you can see it. My name is Barbara, and I'm the coordinator of the Children's Food Campaign, and I'm coming to you from Ladbroke Grove in London this morning. And I will introduce the panel of speakers as they come up, just to save time. But working with me, I have Cecily Spelling from the Food Power group, and also Emma is going to be taking notes from our session today, so that will be circulated following today. I believe the session is being recorded, is that right, Cecily? Yeah, the session is also being recorded, and that will be made available to you all. So please do use the chat to ask questions. If you have responses to other people's questions, use it to have that dialogue with each other. We also do have some live captioning available for those that need it today. So I think without further ado, if there's no other any notifications, I don't think so. Please do use that chat to ask questions as they come up. We probably won't have time to take questions in between speakers, but we have left quite a lot of time at the end of the session, and I'll be trying to keep our speakers on time so that we do have time for that discussion. What I would also say is there is an opportunity to continue the discussion at 12 o'clock or beyond by heading over to our Wonder Space, which is a really interactive area where you can all get into little groups and chat to each other and follow up. So if there are people that you want to talk to as a result of this session, please do invite them to join you in the Wonder Space at 12 if you want to continue. So without further ado, I'm going to invite our first panelist to talk about holiday provision. And we've invited Jane Jones from Scotland, where obviously there's been a really exciting development in that the government has now pledged 365-day-a-year provision for all children eligible for free school meals, both in term time and during school holidays. So I'm going to invite Jane to talk to us a little bit about how they're managing to scale that up across Scotland.
Thank you so much for that, Barbara. Morning all, and thank you for letting me come along today to outline what we're doing in Scotland this summer. I'm just going to share my screen because I've got a couple of slides that might just help frame some of the things I'm going to say. I'd start by saying that providing support for families and for our children and young people during holidays in Scotland is not new. It's something that many councils across Scotland have been doing for many years. There are several different models that have evolved over time, involving the provision of play, activities, family support, and of course the provision of food as part of that programme. And actually Professor John McKendrick from the Scottish Poverty and Inequality Research Unit has recently published a summary of all of those activities in Scotland, and I'll pop the link into the chat function if anyone is interested in seeing that. Until now, however, those activities have relied on individual local authorities funding them, or in partnership approaches with the third sector and community organisations to run them, which is right and proper in many ways. Over the past couple of years, there have been funded pilots to help evaluate the success of this work, and that's been really beneficial for anyone planning activities in future years. But this summer, as Barbara rightly says, there's been a change. The Scottish Government has provided significant commitment to our children and young people in two different ways. The first of these is directly aimed at children and young people in receipt of free school meals. So in line with all of the learning that we've had in the past 12 months about what works across our communities, the Scottish Government has committed to funding free school meals for all primary pupils on a phased basis from August 2021. Now, that commitment includes a commitment for the provision of free school meals for primary and secondary pupils who are entitled during all holiday periods starting this summer. The expectation is that the support will be provided to our children and young people, and with each of Scotland's 32 local authorities determining what method they will use for providing that support. So during holiday periods and times of at-home learning over the past year, we've seen a range of responses, all the way from direct delivery of hot meals to delivery of food parcels and the provision of vouchers or cash to parents. As we look towards this summer and where we're at this stage of the pandemic, from what we're hearing, the local authorities in Scotland will be providing either vouchers, or the vast majority will be providing cash payments to parents directly into bank accounts to facilitate that provision of a free school meal. Now, in addition to that support for all children entitled to free school meals, the Scottish Government has also funded what they're calling a Summer of Play. So that's £20 million that's been allocated, 15 million going directly to local authorities and 5 million to partners. And that is being provided to ensure that local authorities work alongside those partners to provide holiday activities. Now, this funding's specifically there to help improve the well-being of children and young people over the summer period, to deliver holiday activities and experiences, integrating food and wider family support where it's needed. Now, it's targeted at low-income families, but also at children and young people who have been particularly adversely affected by the impacts of the pandemic. Again, each local authority has the discretion to work in partnership with local and national providers to tailor specific activities to help tackle the negative impacts associated with those extended periods of isolation and lack of participation in normal activities that our children have faced. Now, the development of this in Scotland is very much in keeping with UNCRC commitments, so we're using a rights-based approach to enabling a range of children's rights to be further realised during this time, such as the right to play, the right to meet up with friends, the right to receive support to help them recover their health, the right to dignity, respect and to a social life. So our children and young people will be involved in actually designing what those programmes will be that they want to participate in. It won't necessarily be about us making those decisions for them. But the activities should focus on providing opportunities to connect or reconnect, opportunities to play, be active and enjoy ourselves or themselves, ensuring equity and building upon trusted relationships and engagement that already exists. So the local partnerships have flexibility to best use the funding that's allocated to develop programmes and support based on what children want and what suits their circumstances, be that inner city or rural settings. And in line with the aims, the programmes should integrate food and wider family support. And as most of you will know, we in Scotland have just implemented really significant food and drink standards changes, making them probably the most rigorous anywhere in the world. So any activities that are run from or around schools will need to comply with those new standards. And the guidance also makes it clear that even if the activities aren't in a school environment, it would be good practice to keep the food provision in line with those standards. So it's about the quality of the provision as well as just providing it. So, final point for me, while we don't have a huge amount of time to plan for, engage and deliver this because our summer holidays start at the end of June, I know that local authority colleagues across Scotland are already working hard to make that happen. For us, what's really encouraging is that it gives local authorities the flexibility to ensure that those most in need receive what they need in terms of cash or voucher payments and in terms of food and holiday activities that are designed with them, protecting their rights, their dignity and their ability to choose. There you are, quick whistle stop tour of where we're at.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jane. And already, you know, there's lots of questions around, you know, that dual provision of the safety net in terms of the cash that means that no child gets left out, and the activity provision, and that's integrated support, which I know a lot of people find so important. And I think there's some really interesting insights on how that's happening there. So we are going to, I want to just say a big welcome to everybody who's been introducing themselves. It looks like we've got a really good spread from right across the UK, and even someone from Kenya. So welcome to all of you, and please do use the chat to share what's happening locally if you know what's going on. So we're going to move across now to Wales, and Katie Palmer is going to explain a little bit how they're moving from local pilots to national rollouts now.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for inviting me today. I think like Jane, this is not a new arena of work. We've been working on this since 2014, 2015. But the School Holiday Enrichment Programme is known as Food and Fun on the ground, is now an award-winning multi-agency school-based education programme that provides healthy breakfasts and lunches, food and nutrition education sessions, structured physical activity and enrichment activities to children living in areas of need in Wales. It was developed, piloted and evaluated in Cardiff in 2015 through the Sustainable Food Partnership through Cardiff. Food and Fun is now being rolled out in schools across Wales, and that's overseen by the Welsh Local Government Association and the School Holiday Enrichment Programme Advisory Group. The original pilot was developed through joint working with Cardiff Council's Education Catering Team, Cardiff and Vale Community Dietetics Team, Sport Cardiff, Food Cardiff, schools and housing associations. It was also supported by Lindsay Graham and her invaluable work to raise awareness and inspire change back in 2014-15. And invaluable evaluation from Northumbria University at that time. So after the pilot in 2015, in 2016, the Welsh Local Government Association had a little bit of extra funding, and we worked with them to support a Shep pilot model nationally in 10 schools, working with 5 local authorities and 3 local health boards. Cardiff University provided the evaluation and recommended after this process further scaling up the model to understand the educational and health benefits to children and their families in different contexts. What followed was producing set criteria, a quality assurance scheme, menus, training, including the training of all Shep coordinators working in the schools in nutrition skills for life, so that they could deliver food and nutrition skills to the children. All of these have been developed as part of the programme. So as it stands at the moment, Shep is, in summary, a school-based programme delivered by school staff and partners. It's delivered over a minimum of 12 days over the school summer holidays. It includes a healthy breakfast and lunch in line with school food standards. There's a minimum of 1 hour of structured physical activity per day. There's the Shep All Wales Food and Nutrition Education Sessions that form part of the weekly plan, and a family breakfast or lunch offered at least once a week, where families are invited to come and enjoy a meal. And obviously there'll be additional challenges with COVID with this year. And then enrichment sessions, which are provided by school staff and partners. So for example, external agencies will come in and support with things like music, construction activities, 3D printing, math, science, we've had it all. So the main outcomes of Shep are improved mental health and emotional well-being, school engagement and educational attainment, improved aspirations for the children, improved physical activity and improved dietary behaviour. The Welsh Government part-funded the programme in 2017 to expand to 38 food and fun clubs in 12 local authorities and all 7 health boards. And continued Welsh Government funding enabled the programme to grow to 77 schemes in 21 local authorities by 2019. This year, an additional 2.2 million has been allocated to the School Holiday Enrichment Programme in recognition of the important part Shep could play in COVID recovery, almost in doubling its investment to 4.85 million. This will provide opportunities for up to 14,000 children to be more active, eat healthily and develop friendships, while also making the most of local school facilities. Schools are able to apply for funding if their eligibility for free school meals is over 16%, and this includes special schools. Children themselves do not have to be eligible for free school meals to attend the scheme. This is an important distinction with the work that's happening in England. Schemes are coordinated locally through council education catering departments with the support of local steering groups in each area. To receive funding, representatives from the local steering groups and schemes must commit to delivering the core elements of the school holiday enrichment programme. Those were physical activity, nutrition, meals and enrichment activities. Ensure school leadership teams are involved in the planning and delivery. Sign up to follow 22 essential criteria and have regard to 9 recommendations. Submit documentations to the Welsh Local Government Association and implement the quality assurance framework and provide a quality assurance audit summary. This local organisation through local steering groups with national support and oversight from the Welsh Local Government Association and Shep Advisory Group has enabled the scheme to grow to meet local needs whilst maintaining the core criteria and quality assurance for the success and integrity of the programme. The main challenges to the further scale up of Shep, in my view, may require legislative changes. Year-on-year funding commitments from government have made it challenging to develop longitudinal research studies on the impact of Shep and to plan beyond a 1-year cycle. Challenges around staffing, school staff and catering staff can't be fully resolved without changing staff contracts, with the benefit system causing issues with staff working additional hours. And the number of schools delivering Shep is uneven across local authority areas. It may be that the socio-economic duty coming into force in Wales may trigger a solution to this last issue, encouraging local authorities to optimise Shep provision in their area to meet their socio-economic duty. But my feeling is that in order for Shep to meet its potential in Wales, the time has come for consideration of whether or not it should become a statutory provision. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Katie. You packed a huge amount there into a very short amount of time, and I think that that challenge that you raised about ensuring that no child gets left behind in these programmes is really, really important. And you know, where do the safety nets sit alongside the local provision? And the other thing that I think came through really clearly from what you were saying was the central role that schools themselves are playing. When put against some of the rhetoric we heard in some of the Westminster parliamentary debates around whether or not schools are responsible to feed children during school holidays. And we know in practice it is happening, and they know the families and they know the children. And so I think that was really interesting to hear that. Okay, we are going to move now to England, and I'm going to move to, let me see. So in England, the situation, for those who aren't aware, there was a holiday activities and food programme that had funded around 17 local authorities in 10 areas last year. That has now been scaled up to a £220 million programme for 2021. And that requires holiday provision of around 6 for 1 week during Easter and 1 week during October half term, and also 4 weeks during the summer holidays, and a minimum of 4 days per week for 4 weeks for a minimum of 5 hours worth of activities. So that's currently the kind of the requirements under which local authorities and local organisations are bidding for funds. And so we thought it would be really interesting to take a little look at how does that play out, both in urban and in rural areas. And so we're going to go first to Sitske van der Plug from the Mayor's Fund for London, who've been involved in both the piloting and now the rollout in urban areas, and we'll come to the rural perspective next. So over to Sitske first.
Thank you, Barbara. Yeah, thank you so much, and really delighted to be part of this conversation. And you know, some great presentations just before, giving a really clear context, I think, regionally. So from my end, I work at the Mayor's Fund for London, and we are a social mobility charity, and our aim is to improve life chances of young Londoners, particularly those from low-income backgrounds between the ages of 5 and 25. Now, holiday provision is a topic that is of great significance to us. And to give you some kind of local context to that, before COVID, we knew that in London, over 400,000 children and young people experienced food insecurity over the holidays, with many of them also affected by social isolation during this time. Now, we don't know exactly with how much, but these figures have gone up significantly since last year. So the scale of the challenge really is quite enormous. Now, the Mayor's Fund has extensive experience with holiday provision. And last year we were selected, as Barbara just said, to pilot the HAF programme in 2 London boroughs through our Kitchen Social network. And Kitchen Social is London's largest independent holiday provision provider. It's included in the Mayor of London's food strategy, and it also has national relevance through the scale and depth of our work, which has been evaluated by Northumbria University. Kitchen Social is delivered through an extensive network of over 120 local grassroots community organisations, many in deprived areas of London. And it's set up to create a familiar environment where children, young people can come to learn, to socialise, make new friends, and get a free healthy meal during the school holidays. And our Kitchen Social hubs, as we call them, include a range of organisations that is as diverse as London is. So we work with youth clubs, with church groups, adventure playgrounds, housing associations, libraries, you name it. And last year we delivered over 1,400 activity sessions to more than 30,000 children, and we provided just under 500,000 meals. Now, there's a couple of important points, I think, for the HAF conversation here, and I just want to kind of highlight 3 things that I think are particularly relevant for that conversation. Kitchen Social uses food as an opportunity to engage children and young people in lots of different ways, whether it's through, as I was just mentioning, socializing, sports or arts and craft or cooking, theatre, etc. There's lots of different ways. But in other words, Kitchen Social holiday provision is a food program. It's not a food program, but it's a holistic well-being program. So I think that's an important kind of point to start with. Secondly, Kitchen Social thrives on partnerships. So it brings together kind of knowledge and insights of local communities, resources from a range of organizations, councils, companies, and also volunteering from across the board. And to give you some examples, last year we received art packs from the Serpentine Gallery, which we could share with the young people who came to attend hubs or were not able to attend because of COVID, but we were able to send them out. We've had volunteers from caravan restaurants coming to support our hubs with cooking and fun activities. And we also received funding from a wide range of companies and the GLA to roll the program out. So that's the second point on partnerships. And then the third point that I wanted to mention is that Kitchen Social is inclusive. So all of our hubs are open access, no one is means tested. And so every child who's looking to take part in those activities can and is able to. So in terms of the HAF delivery then, and kind of the program that the government is kind of looking to roll out, there are a number of learnings that we can and I think should take forward from the pilot last year. Now, obviously, we very much, welcome the steps that the government has made in allocating resource to holiday provision, but there are a number of issues with this. And first of all, it's exclusive. So HAF is designed for children who are eligible for free school meals. And you recall earlier that I mentioned about 400,000 children in London are experiencing food insecurity or were experiencing food insecurity in 2019. Now, half of these children, so over 200,000, are currently not eligible for free school meals. So it means we are talking about over 200,000 children who cannot access HAF, which is a huge issue. Secondly, HAF is incomplete at the moment. So the HAF scheme, and Barbara, you just mentioned it, covers 6 of the 13 weeks of school holidays over the academic year, which means that 7 weeks are currently not funded. And then the third point that I would want to mention is that capacity is an issue. Now, we have received funding from the Greater London Authority to support councils in delivering HAF from the summer onwards. But there's been little time for councils to get prepared, which overall risks the quality of delivery. So I think those were kind of 3 points that I wanted to highlight. Now, there are opportunities as well. holiday provision is very high, and rightly so, on the political agenda. Councils across the country are now getting involved in a national rollout, which gives us an opportunity to work together in driving permanent change across the board. And we, think as the Mayor's Fund that we should collectively push for a number of things. 3 things in particular. 1, I think the government should expand eligibility of holiday provision so that all young people in need can access social activities and nutritious food during the holidays. And this speaks to the point of exclusion that I mentioned earlier. Secondly, the government should enshrine in law the rights of free school meals young people to access holiday provision all year round. So not just during the holidays, or as we saw last year, when they're not in school because of lockdown, but all year round, and not just kind of limited to the 6 or 7 weeks. And by ensuring there is a statutory responsibility when it comes to HAF, we can protect children and young people against kind of severe impacts of various shocks, whether it's the pandemic, increasing levels of poverty, or sometimes political choice. And then the third and final point that I wanted to make, which is particularly relevant for London, is we would advocate for permanent inclusion of children with no recourse to public funds to receive free school meals. It's currently temporarily offered, but we believe they should be permanently included, because where else will they go, essentially? And I think there's a responsibility, or we think there's a responsibility for these children to be supported as anyone else. Now, there's a lot more to say, but I'm aware I'm getting to 5 minutes, so I will leave it here.
Thank you, Sietske, and some good challenges again for the government there, especially around how far the activity provision approach to holiday support can reach all children, and the need for mixed models and statutory. I think statutory responsibility has now come up twice in these conversations, so that's an interesting thought, where there's kind of common cause across the 4 nations on that front, perhaps, to follow Scotland's lead. So we are also aware that the holiday activity and food provision model possibly works better in an urban context than a rural context. So we thought it would be really useful to hear an insight from somebody trying to make that work in a rural context. So over now to Emily Fay from the Shropshire Food Poverty Alliance to share their perspective on what's happening and how they're trying to scale up.
Thank you. I just wanted to share one slide, and I'll talk to it. So Shropshire is one of the most rural counties in England, and our population is just over 300,000, and it's similar to the population of Nottingham, but we're 44 times bigger. So we roughly have about 1 person per hectare and 149 state schools across the county. So we've got about 6,000 children eligible to free school meals, which is around 15% of the school population. And traditionally, we found it very hard to attract any funding to Shropshire to support children during the school holidays, because we don't have the concentrations of urban areas with really high levels of deprivation, but we find, children are spread all over the county. So I've got this kind of scatter graph of where the children are who are eligible to free school meals. And you can see that although, you do get these clusters in urban areas, there are children all over the county. So we're really delighted to have the HAF funding, but I think the key concern is that very few of those children in rural areas will have access to these programmes. Over the Easter holidays, the council rolled out their programme at quite short notice. So, there wasn't that time to develop the relationships with providers that we might have wanted to see. So of the programmes which did run, very few of those programmes actually provided food. So that's our first major concern. They're mostly sports-based. And they're very much reliant on local providers who wanted to provide that kind of activity. So lots of football and sports types of activities, because they have the closest relationships with schools. Quite a lot of the programmes were run in host schools, and they were only offered to children eligible to free school meals. So I think you have that risk around stigmatisation, especially if you're talking about a small sort of rural school. If you only run a programme for kids eligible to free school meals, you're really singling them out. Very few programmes did run in rural areas, and there were no programmes available for disabled children, SEND children, or children in alternative education. So we now have a HAF coordinator, and we're working with her to try to improve things over the summer. But there's real recognition in Shropshire that this is going to be really challenging. So the first challenge is finding groups who want to run these types of activities. When you break it down, there's not an enormous amount of funding available. And whilst groups might have experience in running activities for children, they don't have the experience of providing the food that's required. The logistics of getting that food across the county to all the different projects that are running, particularly providing hot food, is going to be super challenging. And that sort of model of delivery, 4 days, so 4 hours a day, 4 days a week for 4 weeks of the summer holidays, is really challenging. A lot of groups kind of want to spread it out, so they would go to one village for 1 week, another village to another week, as a way of making sure that children have some access. Our food banks are really worried about what's going to happen over the summer, because families have been receiving the vouchers to help them buy food, and that won't be happening in the summer. And they're feeling that they're going to end up having to support quite a lot of families who can't access HAF. It's certainly not very popular that there won't be that kind of financial support for families. So I think our key concern is that there might not be funding for HAF in the future. So we're looking at a 1-year programme. And then, you know, we don't have that kind of sustainable model going forwards. And I think my kind of key takeaway is that this kind of approach hasn't been thought through in terms of rural areas and how, you know, you can really access and support those children and families. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. That's quite sobering, actually, I think, for a lot of us. And I'm also pondering, and I may come back to you after our next speaker, I'm also wondering how the experiences in rural Scotland and Shropshire might be shared a little bit more, and possibly also there's some I volunteer quite a bit in mid Wales, and I think there's probably some similarities there as well. But we couldn't move to the next stage without also hearing a perspective from Northern Ireland, but also more importantly, and perhaps most importantly, really interested to hear from the perspective of young people themselves who have participated in these programmes. And young people are participating not just as beneficiaries, but also as volunteers and helpers and supporters to these programmes. And I'm really pleased to have Shane Robinson, who is one of the Food Foundation's Children's Right to Food ambassadors, and he's been working with the holiday provision programme in Northern Ireland. So over to you, Shane. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Yes, hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Shane Robinson, and I'm a young food ambassador for the Food Foundation based in Northern Ireland. I've been campaigning for the right to food for children for almost 2 years now, and I got into my role as a food ambassador through my volunteering with a local youth centre, Oasis Youth, which is based in Portadown, which is a town in Northern Ireland. So we've been running the holiday camps for a number of years now, which I've been involved in facilitating mainly. But I'll talk briefly about what we actually do for a bit of context. In 2017, Oasis identified a need for a targeted holiday provision camp for young people and families on school meal allowances to get fed properly during the holiday months. So we have them run in summer, Easter, Halloween and Christmas. It's worth noting that these projects are funded by Almac, which is a large private pharmaceutical company based in the Portadown area. And the idea behind a project like this is to get these young people fed properly with 2 meals per day for the duration of the camp, all while having a bit of fun with it. So we'll have some games and activities which are focused on both mental health and on physical health. Some of the activities will be the likes of art projects or cook-along, or like cooking projects. as well as some maybe fun interactive science workshops, which the kids absolutely love. These camps are targeted at the primary school aged kids who are eligible for the school meal allowance, of course, but we also keep on a great and devoted team of peer mentors aged 12 to 18 to help us out running the camp, but also to get them access to some meals too, as a lot of them would be eligible for the school meal allowance, but would be considered a little too old to be attend just as participants. The reality of the situation is that these holiday provision camps are an absolute necessity to young people and their families. We've seen kids come to us with empty lunch boxes that they've been sent in with because it's too embarrassing to show up without a lunch, or children who have brought a lunch but they have to choose between a sandwich or a drink because they just can't afford to do both. And like, this is why we do what we do. You know, like, we have families come to us asking if we can provide bread or milk for their households, just they can't provide this for themselves just with their income. So we are here to try and help and do our part to get these people the nourishment that they need. And one can only imagine how these same kids and families have been suffering with regards to nutrition over lockdown without the support of schools. But talking specifically COVID times, Oasis have been able to use their fund to provide food directly to the members of our youth club while in lockdown. So all projects moved online and continue to function on a weekly basis. Participants were also provided with a healthy snack each week. And an example of maybe some of the projects that took place were cooking projects with live cook-alongs, where we were able to provide all the ingredients. These were a massive success, as it got people cooking, it got young people cooking healthy and fulfilling meals, which is the key word. They're healthy and fulfilling, not that we're feeding them junk. So this also allowed them to gain the skills like, you know, cook for themselves and their families in the future as well, which was fantastic. And we've seen success from that over social media. Oasis are still making up food packs every week for families who are struggling due to COVID-19 with regards to their employment or finances. However, due to funding restrictions, we have had to limit this to 10 to 15 families per week. On the topic of food packs, Oasis are not the only organisation to be providing to those in need. The Trussell Trust stated over 31,000 food parcels were delivered in Northern Ireland between April 2020 and March 2021. However, this figure only covers food banks within the Trussell Trust network, and so the actual figure is believed to be much higher. I think the community really came together on this one. We had churches, community organisations and charities all working to help those in need by delivering food parcels and wellbeing packs. Now, specifically talking about Northern Ireland as a whole, the government adopted a cash-first approach when providing school meal allowances during lockdown. So eligible families received £2.70 per child per day, which is paid fortnightly into bank accounts. On top of this, Northern Ireland's executive also agreed to make school meal allowance payments to eligible families during school holidays until April 2022, which we see as a huge win. The next goal, of course, would be to get this date extended past April 2022 and potentially raise the £2.70 per day to make sure that these kids are getting fed substantially, because this is the kind of care that they need to grow and to develop. We would also love to see direct contact with the disadvantaged families, especially the kids, to make sure that everyone is getting the support they need. So folks, that's all I have to say today. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully you're able to get some sort of new information, or at least we're able to see this issue from a different perspective. And you're all already making such a huge difference just by being here and helping us all spread our message. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Shane. And I wondered whether, just before we move into the discussion, is there anything you want to say about the Children's Right to Food Charter and what's being called for around these things? Because I think you've raised some broader issues around the experience of young people, the stigma, the language, all of those things in the Charter. And I think that would be really, really good to also just throw into the mix here.
Yeah, so one of the things you might have noticed, I've been calling it school meal allowance. We find that a lot of young people have like this kind of stigma with the word free school meals. So just colloquially, I've been saying school meal allowance rather than free school meals, just to try and destigmatize the term, was one of the things we were talking about. And then we've also spoken about, of course, like having like this provision across all holidays from the government, like where the Northern Ireland Executive have agreed until, like I said, April 2022 to continue to pay this allowance. We would love to see that as a more permanent thing, maybe even get the amounts raised. £2.70 per day isn't a lot of money to feed somebody on, especially if they're in school. So young people have said that they've been going to school maybe and they have to get a bottle of water, which is £1. Then they have £1.70 to spend. So they might have to just get a small lunch. They don't get a break. They are struggling because they have come into school without breakfast. Logistically, it's very hard to divide up that small amount of money. So we would love to see that raised as well. I'll see about getting the wee link maybe sent in about more about what we're doing with the children's right to food as well. But yeah, that's kind of the bulk of what we want.
Thank you so much, Shane, and thanks for a great presentation, as people are saying in the chat. And Laura says, Shane, we are super, super proud of you. So you got your mates here as well. We've got a couple of questions, but please do throw some more into the chat. I would like to pick up this piece about the challenges in rural areas. And I know Katie and Jane were both nodding vehemently when I kind of said, I'm sure there's some similar issues. So Jane, is there anything that you want to say about how you're making your programme work in sort of the more dispersed rural areas of Scotland? And then I'll come to you, Katie.
Rurality is a real challenge across the board, and whoever cracks this nut first will be lauded, because when allocations are given, even if there is in Scotland, when the allocation is given to the 32 local authorities for a programme like this, there is a rurality aspect added to that funding, but it's not enough when you're having to deliver across a really disparate area. So speaking locally as someone responsible for catering in Argyll and Bute, we have 23 inhabited islands. How do we provide support to children that are in islands as well as those that are in towns and villages across the mainland? It takes us days to get from one part of the area to the other, so it's not an easy ask. Our approach for this summer is a bit like what Emily and Katie have both said. We have to be pragmatic about what we can deliver safely and what we can deliver well before we then roll that out beyond. So we're looking at this stage of having a 10 hub approach. So we have 10 main hubs, and that will provide in some of our islands as well. Transporting our children into that is expensive. Making sure those buildings are safe in the middle of a pandemic is expensive. So there are all these administrative costs that aren't accounted for necessarily when that funding is provided, because you have to provide the catering, you have to provide the cleaning, you have to provide the transport. And that doesn't leave very much for delivering the programme. The other thing that we're really trying to do, though, is look at it, as I say, we're trying to use a rights-based approach. So it's about what we can provide for those individual children and families as well. I think someone had said that they weren't able to provide, for example, for children with disabilities. Well, they're firmly within scope in Scotland. So what works best for that family might not be going to a hub to participate in activities with other children. It might be provision of a voucher to go to a leisure centre free of charge along with their family. So we're trying to just make sure that we don't have a one-size-fits-all approach at this stage.
Thanks so much, Jane, and really good point at the end there about also access for disabled children and their families. Katie, was there something you would like to add?
Yeah, I think, well, just to echo Jane's comments really around investments, this stuff doesn't come cheap, and actually proper investment is needed to make it work, especially two of the areas we talked, more difficult areas we've talked about, which is rurality and also working with children with special needs. So I think this is where the school model really does bear out, because schools are used to working with transport. You can bring children to one place from lots of different areas. And of course, yes, that costs more, but actually providing transport to get children to the right places is invaluable. And that's how we've been working with it in Wales, and an appreciation that you are going to have less value in scale, because you'll have smaller numbers of children going to the schemes in areas of rurality. Just to pick up on the kind of the special needs, again, we work with kids in special needs schools as well, where, you know, schemes like this are just so invaluable, because those children rely on routine as part of their coping mechanisms. So allowing those children to go into their school environments where they know the staff and all the rest of it is really invaluable. But it's also what that gives to other members of the family in terms of the parents and in terms of the other siblings in the household who might benefit from having that one-on-one time with their parents. while their siblings are having fun with their friends in school. So I think those are important points to make as well. And we've worked with transport as well, working with transport to take kids to special needs schools also.
Thanks, Katie. Now we're going to throw the gauntlet back at all of you in the next part of our conversation, because we want to kind of get a little bit of idea generation going. And so Cecily is going to put a link to Menti Meter into the chat now, and we've got a couple of questions on there that we want to ask you. And the first one is, having listened to all of our speakers this morning, what's the key insight that you have that would make holiday provision holiday provision programs in all their forms deliver the greatest impact? So what is the key insight or takeout that you have? And we'd love to hear all of your thoughts on that question. And then we've got a second one coming up shortly. So do take a moment to click on that link. That is it in the chat now? Yes. So Cecily's put that in the menti.com chat. So that'll open up a new window for you, hopefully. But while you're busy doing that, we'll continue the dialogue. And I wanted to pick up the question that has been asked about how we bridge this gap between the children who can take up these programs and the children who can't. And Brian has said that, in some local providers have indicated that only about 25% of children are likely to take up their holiday provision programme, and that there are still many children, and I think Shane, you mentioned that as well, although in Northern Ireland they have put in the cash transfer model as a backup, and in Scotland you've got a backup as well. So is there anything else in terms of what we should be discussing to make sure no child gets left behind in holiday provision? So I'm gonna come to Sitska first and see what you've got to say on this, as a long-standing deliverer of these programs.
So in terms of making sure no child gets left behind, I mean, I think one of the things that I kind of touched briefly on in my presentation is that we have, and I'm just speaking from a London perspective, but we have kind of a very large group of young people who are not eligible for free school meals and therefore are kind of do not have access to. We also have, quite large group of people with SEND needs, for example. Then, we've mentioned people who are disabled, and so there are large groups of young people who can currently not access free school holiday provision. And I think, what we do at our end is we make sure, now that HEF is being rolled out, we focus very much on working with our hubs and making sure that those people are being supported. We also speak with local authorities to try and identify where those children are and how we can best reach them. I think another thing is we also are on the DFE's advisory board, so it's an opportunity for us to raise this issue and to kind of really bring home the kind of the disparity in the approach with the HEF program. And I think it's really important to kind of do both things, so to try and tackle the needs where we can immediately, and that's what we can do through kind of the community structure and kind of the funding and etc., everything that we can do to address that, but also at kind of the decision-making level to put this in front of the Department for Education and explain the scale of the problem. And I was mentioning in the chat as well, there's something about data there as well. If we can show how large the problem is, that will, I think, add weight to the argument. But it's definitely something, I think we cannot talk about holiday provision or HEF without talking about the children that are currently not eligible. I think, we welcome, of course, everything that has been done so far, but it's not enough. And, we kind of really risk leaving very large groups of children and young people behind. So I think there's kind of a dual approach in kind of really hammering home the message where we can, where decisions are being taken, but also working very closely with councils and community structures to address and to support those specific groups.
Thanks, Sitska. Emily, is there anything you wanted to say around how do we pick up those who are likely to miss out.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo exactly those comments. So data is so essential. This last year, we have worked with our council to do a survey of all school children, and we included questions around food insecurity on there. And the survey responses indicated much higher food insecurity than the numbers of children on free school meals. So, you know, and that's kind of the feedback that we're getting from teachers in schools and other people in the community, is that there are this group of families who are really struggling financially, and people are going without food, but they're just not eligible for free school meals.
Great, thank you so much. And we do have a question around eligibility as well. So I kind of, so Laura has asked, how do we challenge the government to say that eligibility for free school meals are not the total indicator of poverty and vulnerability, and how do we push for a universal offer? I'm going to go to Jane, because you've won you've not won a universal offer, but you have won sort of some huge strides in Scotland. So how do we move from where we are now to a kind of a more inclusive universal offer?
Yeah, we hope it's just the start of that universal provision, and that will really help to tackle the issues that Shane talked about. We shouldn't be disaggregating between free and paid. It should just be a school meal, and how we create that cultural change will be really interesting to see in the next few years. But it's come about through that realisation that the only way to ensure equity for all is through free school meal provision. And as I kind of touched on earlier, a lot of that we've known it for a long time, we've known it for many years, and we've campaigned quite hard for it. However, the pandemic has really brought it to light, and I think at least what we have in Scotland is a recognition. So some of this came about because we had a social renewal advisory board established by Scottish Government to identify the best of the learning from the pandemic, so we can make sure that we create a just and fairer society. And what we should be doing is looking at that as an exemplar and saying, why don't we have this elsewhere in the UK?
Thank you.
Fair and just if it's not across the board.
Yeah, thank you. Katie, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I think for me, there is a recognition in Wales that it's not just for free school meal children, and that's happened through the way in which the school enrichment programme is structured. So it's delivered in areas of need. It's delivered in schools which have got over 16% of free school meal eligibility. But as I said in my presentation, you don't have to be a child that's receiving free school meals to attend. So I think that's really important. Should also mention that the programmes also work very closely for referrals with social services as well, which is another important element of the programme to look after vulnerable children too. But for me, the key thing is in Wales, the socioeconomic duty has just been enacted back in March. Which means that local authorities are going to have to take due regard to inequality in everything that they're doing. And I think for me, it's key that all local authorities at a local level are monitoring food insecurity. They know what their figures are. And as part of that, they're making sure that the schools that need to be delivering these programmes in Wales are delivering them as part of their socioeconomic duty. Obviously, the next step from that would be looking at how we could get statutory provision for holiday provision in Wales and across the whole of the UK, ideally.
Yeah, great, thank you. Cecily, I think we should move to the next slide on the Menti Meter, if that's okay. And are we then going to share what people have posted as a result of that? So hopefully you've all had a chance to have a quick look at the first question, and we'll see what people have said. But I think there's a second question. Is that right? Yes, if we had an opportunity to improve provision, what would your message be to each of the governments of the UK? So if we had an opportunity, what would be your top recommendation for the governments of the UK? So Jane has just said another key pressure point is enabling local authorities in England to have discretionary powers to provide free school meals to children who aren't entitled on the basis of income. That was a critical stepping stone in Scotland. And it does seem to me that one of the key issues, sorry about that, is that we need to kind of get that flexibility back into the way in which local authorities are asked to design these programmes, or there ought to be a clear statutory kind of responsibility that if you receive funding, you've got to hold some of that for provision for those who can't access things through the activity-based approach. Brian wants to know, how are places funded in Wales if people who are not eligible are allowed to attend? People who are not eligible are allowed to attend the activities and food programmes. Katie, is that something you can pick up?
Yeah, that's still funded through the Welsh Government programme.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a fully funded Welsh Government programme.
Great. Okay, thank you. We are going to come to the end of our time, so I'm going to ask each of the panelists that second question that we've got on the Menti Meter, which is what would be, if we had an opportunity to improve holiday provision, what would your top message be to the UK government? And that might be in your area or across all 4 nations. So I'm going to go to Shane first. Let's hear from you. What would be your top message?
I would say it needs extended throughout the year rather than just limited to a couple of weeks per year would be my top one, just to make sure that everyone's constantly getting fed. Because I think we forget about weekends a lot. Weekends do exist, you know, and they're not in school, they're not getting fed. There should be a provision throughout the year. Okay, so 365-day a year provision, not just the number. It's 190 days kids are in school, and then there's the however many days that there's holidays, but nobody remembers weekends. Okay, thank you for that. Emily.
I think for me, it would be to consider whether cash first approaches would be more appropriate, particularly in rural areas.
Okay, thank you. So extend 365 days, cash first approaches. Sitska.
I think for me, it would be to expand eligibility of holiday provision to ensure all young people in need can access the activities and nutritious food during the holidays.
And how would you define need in that context, Sitska?
So children and young people who come from low-income backgrounds and do not have access to sufficient food and social activities during the school holidays. So anyone so it's not necessarily related to free school meals, but anyone who fits that category essentially.
Because I am mindful that the Child Poverty Action Group has said, even I think it's 2 in 5 children living in poverty are not currently eligible.
Exactly.
And there's an argument, I think, around school meal provision generally, which is, do we set these thresholds under universal credit as we have got in England now?
Yeah.
Or do we kind of reconceive the whole concept?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, the letter I think is a really important. We don't have time, but I think it definitely is something for us to think about more. Yeah, I would agree with that.
I'm plotting a webinar coming up in June, hopefully, on looking at universal approaches. So look out for that, everybody.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to Jane. What's your message back to government?
Adequate funding to ensure true equity and ensuring those programmes are co-designed by our children and young people and not just done to them.
That's a great insight, actually, getting young people involved in the design. I reckon the Children's Right to Food ambassadors and Bite Back 2030 members will be at the front of the queue wanting to clamour for that role. Katie.
Okay, I think I would go for national leadership on this agenda, but given local control. So really building on what I said earlier about, the duty being on local authority areas. They know their population, they know their children, the schools know their children, the communities know their children, and they should be given adequate power and resources to develop quality controlled or quality assured programmes locally, but with good national leadership.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think when we were lobbying for an expansion of HAF and half approaches across to make them more national. I think we were kind of saying money should be put at the local authorities to determine how it's being used, but instead they kind of created this national formula in England that has hampered, I think, provision. So we have the results from the Menti Meter. So if you want to click through, are we going to put that on screen, or shall I put? Are you putting that on screen, Emily? Shall I? Cecily, or shall I?
I'll do it. I'm just having it's not showing me the right one. So here we go.
Okay. So what we've got, so key insight, inclusivity has come up really strongly. Local provision, design forum with young people. Here we go. Community partners. Lots of stuff around community engagement and local leadership. So creating the funding to deliver on local leadership and inclusivity seem to be the really strong themes coming up from you on this, and the real concern about not leaving children out. And then also that flexibility of the type of support available. Shall we have a look at the second one?
Oh.
If we had an opportunity, what would the message be? Listen to the message around us, make our children, young people a priority. I think nobody would disagree with that. And universal across the whole of holiday periods. Again, flexibility. A more coordinated response between local authorities and charities and community sectors. We probably haven't picked up all of the challenges facing local delivery partners, actually, and you know, how and where they involve community partnerships and where and how those work. So that might be an ongoing conversation that some of you might want to have. So youth work shows a universal offer can work. Isolating young people in receipt of free school meals is limiting and not dignified. I think that's a really, really good point. Okay, well, thank you everybody for your input into this session. My plumber is calling me and I'm ringing my doorbell right now, so I'm probably going to have to go. But thank you everybody so much for all of your input into today's conversation. As I said right at the start, there is an opportunity to continue the chat over in our Wonder Space, which is a really cool space that Cecily has set up. If you want to carry on talking, and you can go in there and create a little holiday provision conversation amongst yourselves. We will be sharing the responses to the Menti Meter as part of the follow-up to this session, along with some notes and the recording of this session. So I'd really like to first of all say thank you to Jane, to Emily, to Sitska, to Shane and to Katie for all of their input into this webinar, and especially also to Cecily for setting it up, to you for all of your input, and to Emily for keeping our notes today. So let's keep that conversation going. It's great that organisations like Mayor's Fund for London and Kitchen Social are part of the HAF Alliance, which I've put the link to that in the chat, and also feeding into the Department for Education, and James feeding into the Scottish government. So, you know, please do keep in contact, and let's keep feeding back these local experiences, because that's the only way we're going to make sure no child is left behind, whether it's in school term time or in the holidays. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day.